Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
Did you know generosity gives you? The longest running study, says that the more generous Americans are, the more happiness, health, and purpose in life they enjoy. This is the science. And if you put God over here and you said, okay, God, what do you think about generosity? He says, you must each decide in your heart how much to give. And God will generously provide all you need. True wealth is having everything you need when you need it. For God is the one who provides seed for the farmer and then bread to eat. You will be enriched in every way so that you can always be generous. You could summarize Paul's teaching and say, giving we receive, grasping we lose. Exactly as science has taught us. What we know is Paul teaches us when you sow seeds, there's a crop, happiness, purpose and meaning, avoidance of depression, hope for the future, and a life that you look 5 years, 10 years and go, man, I love the direction my life has gone.
All right, so Texas OU, we talked about it on Sunday. You and the boys watched it? You stood around the TV in the living room?
Yep, we did. Well, yeah, we stood, we sat, we yelled, we cried, we mourned, we did it all. We did it all. It was an emotional. I said this on Sunday, an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
I felt so good for about 2.5, 3 quarters.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yep.
And then I felt so bad that I hate to admit it. And here's an interesting story. That I took my Texas shirt off and I put my maroon for Austin shirt on. And, the maroon ones we have, which that's a drastic move.
Yeah.
And then I'll just be totally honest. I said, boys, we're becoming Alabama fans.
You said that.
I did.
What?
Yeah. So, and then I think the Lord has a sense of humor. Legitimately I do. But then, we say that as something to explain something.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Alabama loses.
Well, yeah, they lose, but exactly. So that was kind of like the punctuation point. But then Jonathan's buddy was over, and they were all talking, and then his dad comes to pick him up, and I didn't know his dad goes to Northpoint. And so we're in my driveway, we're talking, he's got golf attire, and I'm like, talking about golf, and I was like, you playing golf today? And he's like, hey, what's up with the shirt? And I was like, what do you mean, what's up with the shirt? He goes, hey, we go to Northpoint. We hear you're a big UT fan. That's not a UT shirt.
Oh, you got called out on it.
I got called out. And then I had to try to explain. But then when you explain something and you're like, this sounds terrible. Like it sounds like I'm such a poser UT fan, which I have been dedicated and committed for decades.
Yeah.
And this was my one moment to waver. And I got called out on it.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it was pretty tough. So anyways,
I'm sorry.
That's what I think about the game.
Another big thing happened this weekend in some people's mind. We had the Ted Lasso Season 2 finale.
Did it happen this weekend?
It did. Did you not watch it?
Well, I think we watched up until, we probably did watch the season finale.
Okay.
And then we were like, it just started.
Yeah.
I feel like Ted Lasso just started like a week ago.
Yeah.
So how can the finale be?
Oh, you mean of Season 2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like it just started. So
Yep. Been 3 months, but
where have I been?
Yep. It was interesting. Well, I guess if you haven't seen it yet, and for anybody else, I guess we shouldn't spoil things.
No.
So maybe we should just jump in.
Yeah.
All right.
Why
So
not?
we kicked off new series, Paradox of Generosity.
Oh yeah.
Part 1.
Hot one.
Yep, it was a pretty good topic, and you talked about a lot of different things. I want to kind of hone in on a few aspects of what you mentioned on Sunday.
Sure.
One of the things you talked about was the book. Really, what the series is based off is the Paradox of Generosity, and by a study done at Notre Dame. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So Notre Dame, and what's interesting is a study was done a few years ago. Do you know when?
I think 2010.
2010.
2015, 2010.
Okay, so but this study discovered the same exact thing that Jesus said 2,000 years ago, which was when you give, you actually receive in the process of giving. Mm-hmm. And it's that first is last, last is first kind of paradox. I mean, that is the paradox right there. Yeah. And so, you didn't have a lot of time because you were building so many kind of fundamental pieces of the series to talk about the book. So I'm curious, what were some of the big ideas from the research in the book that you didn't have time to talk about on Sunday?
That's a lot. I'll just kind of echo some of the things you said. I think one of the things I really love is that anytime that if you're familiar with the Bible and familiar with the scriptures, and then over here, it's like a new discovery of science, a new thing of science. Hey, in the last 10 years, in the last 15, I mean, we did this with the whole brain and what's going on with all the, neuroscience, and we're learning so much, but everything that neuroscience is saying is exactly what the scripture said 2,000 years ago and said it's possible to change. And so same thing with generosity. I think one of the things I really appreciate about the book is it calls it a paradox, and that satisfies my emotional tension, because my emotional tension is it's not logical.
This doesn't make sense.
No, if I hold on to, that's beneficial. If I store up, that's beneficial. If I keep more for me than you, that's far more beneficial for me and my family. So, like the logic side of things, I love that the book actually deals and meets me emotionally where I'm at. And that's why the title is what it is, The Paradox of Generosity. A paradox is like contradictory things that even though it's not or seems not logical, it seems incoherent, seems like, man, it goes against the emotions. It's true.
Yep.
And so it's like either I'm going to beat my life against that or I'm going to wrap my life around that and benefit from the truths of science. Yeah. And so I love that. That's thematically the book. But I think some other things, a couple things that it talks about like fake generosity, and that's the idea to go, hey, if I want to get the benefits, which I talked about the 5 benefits that the study says of generosity, you can't like really fake it. It's like one of those things to go like, hey, I want that, so I'm going to be generous today, and somehow I'm going to get those in my life. I love that it addresses that, because the pragmatic side of our culture and the pragmatic side of me just wants to go, hey, I'm going to be generous this week. Hey, I'm going to be generous because I want it for me. It's far deeper than that. It's far more relational, and it's far more about love and the benefit. Like, I see how this could make a difference in their life. I'm motivated to do it out of that. So
it's like an altruistic generosity, like purely for the benefit of the other person.
Right. And so it speaks to that and the tension of that. But it also speaks to the tension of the egg or the chicken kind of tension, if you will, because it's like, well, am I going to receive happiness and health and a better future because I was already happy and I was already healthy and I was already optimistic about the future and avoiding depression, therefore I was generous? Or is it I'm going to do the generous activities, and those generous activities are actually going to provide the things that I currently don't have, the happiness, the avoidance of depression. And it goes into depth about this tension, and it actually, I mean, the conclusion is the arrows actually go both ways. That sometimes you may not feel it, but you need to do it to feel it. And then sometimes it's a result of, man, that's just my disposition. Like, I have a generous disposition. I've learned about generosity, and I'm happy, and so I'm happy to give. I'm happy to invest. I'm happy. So, it unpacks that. And then the thing I didn't get to go over on Sundays, all the different, graphs and charts and all the different ways you can be generous. And if you're generous at 38%, or you're generous at 12%, or, how Americans just in general are not that generous. And it talks about all the stats and all the research, which I nerd out on. Like, I love all that stuff. Yeah. And so if you're like, hey, can you quantify that? Can you deconstruct that really big statement and bring it to some all these data points? Because I love data. Mm-hmm. The book provides ad nauseum that. Yeah. And that's really cool.
Why just a quick question on that. Why aren't Americans super generous, would you say?
Well, I like I alluded to it on Sunday, I think it's part of it is the whole, education information piece. I think we've been indoctrinated, save, and I think there's money to be made on a lot of the indoctrination from, of what we need to believe and what we're told is true. And so I think it's like, yeah, I mean, I need X amount of dollars in retirement. I need X amount of dollars for my kids. I need X amount of dollars in my, emergency fund. I need X amount of dollars for me and my personal happiness. And then I do think, because it is a paradox, we're playing with something that's hard to get our minds and our hearts, our emotions around. And so logically speaking, it's going against what, perhaps the wave of culture. It's going against the wave of what we feel emotionally. And so it's hard. It's
and it's essentially going against, in a way, not directly, but the American dream.
Yeah.
Is retire and
kind
of just live your last years sitting on the porch, sipping something strong.
Why did you put that in
Did
there?
you get that? I don't know.
Are you talking about sugar, or are you talking about a little alcohol?
No, it was a country song that I've heard before.
Okay.
So it's probably alcohol if it's a country song. So
yeah, but I'll in terms of the book, I really, I encourage people to get it, and I don't get any benefit. The benefit is 100% for the person who gets it.
Yeah.
But I would like to read just like in the last chapters talk about all these stories of people who were like, no way will I be generous. It's counterintuitive, and I'm not going to be generous to my alma mater. I'm not going to be generous to this movement. I'm not going to be generous to my church. So I love that it picks just a very human fabric. It's not a religious book. It's just a book about science and generosity. And at the end of all these people who they were following for 5 years, individuals, families, couples, the conclusion, and I love, this is so important. So, if you're watching, listening, lean into this. It says, the message of this book is simple, but we think also profound and important. Generosity is paradoxical. Those who give their resources away receive back in turn. In offering our time, money, energy in services of others' well-being, we enhance our own well-being as well. In letting go of some of what we own for the good of others, we better secure our own lives too. The paradox of generosity is a sociological fact confirmed by evidence drawn from quantitative surveys and qualitative interviews. We have good reason to accept this conclusion and no good reason to ignore it. We can also state the paradox negatively. By clinging to what we have, we lose out on higher goods we might gain. By holding on to what we possess, we diminish long-term value to us. In protecting only ourselves against future uncertainties and misfortunes, we become more anxious about uncertainties and vulnerable to future misfortunes. In short, by failing to care well for others, we actually do not properly take care of ourselves. And then it ends with this: understanding the paradox of generosity is the relatively easy part. More difficult is learning how we can actually become more generous. And the book, this is why I want people to get it, is it explains that. It meets your emotions, and it gives you a way forward, practically speaking. So anyways.
yeah. Well, I really like that last part. In short, by failing to care well for others, we actually do not properly take care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's community right there. That's kind of a tribal mentality. That is, and then you take that all the way down to money. That's surprising, but very powerful stuff to think about.
Yeah, and throughout the book, one of the things I appreciate they did is they've taken all different major world religions and all different philosophies, from Confucius to pick whoever, and they've taken the quotes all throughout human history that people said about generosity, and it's awesome how they all align. There's unity in the quotes to go, dang it, be generous. I mean, if you're a God follower, not a God follower, it will benefit your life and it will benefit the world. Just be radically, radically generous. And so, I mean, you see there's tons and tons of quotes from, all different religions, all different philosophers throughout history.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit about your personal story on Sunday and how you and Jill just have been led on multiple occasions to kind of be radically generous, so kind of above and beyond. Mm-hmm. But that it wasn't kind of on a whim, it wasn't irresponsible, that for y'all, it was really a process. I mean, you talk about it in such a way like God told you in such, in a way to give, 100%. Mm-hmm. And, but that is a process. It's not like you woke up one morning, you turn to Jill and you're like, I've got a great idea. And she's like, I love it.
Although that would not surprise her if I did that. She'd be like, yeah, that's par for the course here.
Yeah. She's like, all right, it's been about a couple of years. Here we go. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that process? Like, what does it mean to invite God in when navigating financial decisions and asking, how can I be generous?
Yeah. So at the outset, I just want to say, I'm not talking about fatalism. I'm not talking about abdicating your responsibility as a provider for your home. I think it's really, really important to clarify that and to be financially responsible, to put food on the table and shelter over the heads of your family. You need to be responsible. That's part of character. That's part of what God called you to do. And that's thematically throughout the Bible. So that's one thing that I think is really important. The other thing, though, that I think is really important is what I alluded to at the end. Like, my biggest challenge when it comes to generosity is, have you asked God? Have you invited him into this process? Has it become formulaic? Is it become, the piece of like, hey, just give 10%? Well, I don't want to negate that as a good guidepost and a good starting place, but man, that is very religious. I'd rather just invite God, and like I said on Sunday, he may say 0, he may say 5, he may say 2, he may say 50, he may say 75, I don't know, but let him say it. That's adventurous. That's relational. And so for me personally, I think the process looks very much like, hey, if there's something coming up or like, building campaign or something at church or anything along those lines, that's when we've been prompted to go like, gosh, let's consider. Our first move for a few weeks is just to pray. Go, God, like, you know what we got? You know what? Here's our bills. Here's our mortgage. Here's how much groceries cost with 5 boys. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. Here's how much, we need to meet our needs. And we're really careful with needs and wants. And we go, and here's what we want. Like, it'd be great to have these luxuries. It'd be great to have these conveniences throughout the month. But we begin to look at that and invite God in, and we're looking at our budget, and we're looking at what responsibility looks like and what God's calling us to do. We're looking at our extra, and I want to be very careful because I know this is a major pushback, especially with what our culture pushes us to. But we look at our, 401k, we look at our retirement, we look at our college savings fund for all 5 of our boys, we look at our emergency fund, we look at all of that, and we say, God, what do you want us to do? And I think it's super risky. Mm-hmm. But I'm just telling you, it's the most adventurous. It's one of the most adventurous things we've done in our life and in our relationship with our Heavenly Father. And so Jill prays and I pray, Jill prays and I pray, and we do that for a few weeks. And then we really don't talk much about it until we go, okay, let's sit down and what did God put on your heart? And what's so cool, more times than not, what God was leading Jill and what God was leading me is almost the exact same thing. And it's, again, one of the coolest pieces to go, man, God feels far more relational right now than formulaic. He feels far more relational than religious. And we've been praying, and God, what do you want us to do? And oh my gosh, here's big faith or small faith or, here's being, and so we sit down, we look at our budget, and on a couple occasions, he said, all of that extra, and this is really, really tough, and I shared this on Sunday, I want you to give all the above and beyond. Anything, and this is specific to everything you have for retirement, everything you have for the boys' college funds, everything you have for a rainy day. What if the washer or dryer breaks? What if the transmission goes out in the car? Give it all. And for Jill and I, it's been like, what? Because that feels, in a sense, like we are negating our financial responsibilities. But we not only do that because that's kind of, the first step, and there's no formula to this, but then we go, okay, that's what we've been called to do. That's crazy, but that's what we've been called. And then I sit down with a mentor, and we've done this on a couple occasions, and I sit down with somebody who is generous. It's really important because if you're fearful and I sit down with you, I'm going to take on your fear. If you're greedy and I sit down with you, I'm going to take on your greed. So I want somebody who, if you will, is as balanced as you can. We've sat down with people who have multiple houses. By all accounts, in our culture, they would say, you would look at the people we've sat down with and go, you're really rich. You have so much, so many cool experiences, so much money, da-da-da-da-da. But they're radically generous. And we've sat down with those individuals and just said, hey, here's what we're thinking. And here's what we've been praying. And here's my retirement. Here's what do you think is wise? And through those conversations, we've gleaned wisdom. And then ultimately we get to a point that we pray about it some more after we seek wisdom, open the scriptures, and we say, this is what God called us to do. And he knows exactly what we need next week, next month. He knows what our boys need for their educational purposes, or if they're not going to pursue those educational purposes, well, he knows exactly what we need for retirement and how much we need and all that kind of stuff. He knows, and we're utterly convinced of it. And then we go for it, and we do it. And I'm just telling you what I said on Sunday. Every single time he has met our needs. Every single time we've discovered true riches are having what we need when we need it. And not what we want. That's a big difference. And it has led to more purpose, more happiness, more contentment, more joy for the future, optimism for the future. It's led to personal growth, and I shared some of those on Sunday. But that's really it. I mean, we just invite God into the whole process, invite wisdom into the process, read the scriptures, and go, okay, Lord, this is what you've called us to do. We're going to do it, and trust him.
Yeah. A couple questions on that. Having older kids, there's things that they want and they desire. And, well, my friend got this, and, this thing happened. How do you navigate saying no to those things, knowing that you and Jill kind of trusted God in this big way? Like, do you invite the boys in on that? Do you explain what y'all decided and what you felt like God, how do you kind of deal with that kind of?
Yeah, all of the above. Invite them into it in the process if they have some of the cognitive abilities and maturity to be able to, invite the Lord in. And even when they were young, I mean, for Austin, which we just did a couple of years ago, they all prayed. They all committed, like individually. And then, we talked about us as a family and the cost of that. And from education, it's like, you boys may have to work. Like, we may have just a little bit to get you a book. Not books, but book. And, when it comes to your cars, here's the thing. And, it's not emotionally satisfying. I've got teenagers, and they're real human beings, which means they push back.
With brains not fully developed yet.
Yeah, they push back significantly. And what's interesting is watching them ride that fence of what culture tells them is going to bring them happiness and joy and contentment and purpose and significance and security in life is money, money, money. And they're believing it. And then they come back and they're like, but they believe it. And they're trying to learn what that really means. What's responsibility? What's wise? What's trust? What's faith? And I think, for Jill and I, it's a real tension. Sometimes they push back hard and it feels like, dang, did we make a bad decision? And that's an honest thought. And it also allows us to have a foundation to speak from character that, boys, here's what it looks like to follow the Lord. Here's what it looks like to go, we trust you big. And then let's just pause a second. And oftentimes I'll do this. What kind of car are you driving? All three of my boys who drive cars drive a far more it's like double the value of my car. And I drive like, for me, it's fun and it's decent. But I'm sitting there, I've told you this before. You drive up to our house and it looks like the movie I want to call it F9. But it's
Fast and the Furious.
Fast and the Furious. I mean, our house looks like that. If you drove by our house, you're like, good Lord, offerings must be good at Northpoint, as you look at our house. But the truth is, if you knew all the backstories and you knew how those cars came our way and how God's provided, and now Sam's in college and how you would just go, oh my gosh, that's wild. That's an adventure. That's like, there's no way you're going to slay that dragon on that adventure. But like, God showed up in the right way, in the right time, and some of the ways we didn't expect. It was like he was so faithful. And you have abundantly more than probably what you would have if you would have saved the money for those things. And I've heard, it gets weird, but I've heard Christians say, like, that's God math. Like, it's really hard to quantify it. But I'm just telling you, that's where I've said, you got to ask the question, does God know what I need? Does God know what I need? Not abdicating your financial responsibilities. Don't be foolish. Be wise. But yes, invite God in and see what he does. And I'm just telling you, there's all the tensions, but yeah, it's been cool to be on the other side of that.
Yeah. Now, how do you, so let's say you guys bump into, I'm totally going off the question. Sure.
You can go off script.
And we could take stuff out of it.
Sure. Yeah.
But how do you guys, let's say you bump into that thing, God's telling you, hey, just empty it out.
Yeah.
And then next month comes along and you're like, we're going to start from scratch and we're starting to save for retirement. Like, do y'all find yourself in that place? Or, how do you kind of change your, because it sounds like you've given a couple of times in specific, but then on a regular basis, you also talk about how, being generous is not a religious thing. It's not a 10% thing each month, but it's looking at your finances and inviting God in every month when you're paying the bills and going, God, how do you want us to be generous this month? How do you kind of keep that front of mind, I guess?
Yeah, it's just, I think if I'm hearing the question right, it's a little bit of like, just create the habit. It's a habit not to initially, like, hey, I get paid, give first, save second, live on the rest. I've talked about that before. Give first, okay, 10%, 10%, 80%, 10%, 10%, 80%. I'm a robot. I don't even think about it. Well, there's some inherent value in that. So that's why I want to be very careful with that, not to say, oh, that's a bad idea. I'm just saying be careful with the religious side of that. And so, I just think it's important to go, hey, we got paid this month. God, what do you want us to do? God, our palms are open. What do you want us to do?
Yeah.
And then I do think, if you looked at our budget, in which I keep on a spreadsheet, I'm old school.
Nice.
And track every dollar and do all those kind of things.
There are apps for that,
I know, but I'm probably less secure in the way I do it. And then, my irrational fears of apps. But they're not even irrational.
Irrational fears of apps.
Yeah.
You just dated yourself quite a bit.
Yeah. I know. I'm an old man. Yeah, gray hair's coming out right now. But anyways, we just plug away and, it's like the horizon, we can see on the horizon, there's, Timbo asked me the other day, hey, Dad, have you saved for my college? That's a hard question.
Yeah.
It was a hard question.
You're like, yes, but.
Yeah, it was a hard one to answer because we've also talked about generosity. So that's what I'm talking about. The tension is real. It's palatable, but God's faithfulness is equally real and even more important in those discussions. And it's teachable moments for our kids. It's teachable moments for Jill and I. And so, sure, we, okay, what does it look like to start saving for retirement at this age, and all that kind of stuff. So
I want to play devil's advocate a little bit because I want people who are listening to this podcast, watching it, to really glean something from it and hear the heart of what you're saying. But, Timbo asked that question and you go, it's a conversation that starts, but at the same time, there's probably somebody listening or thinking that's going, Buck, that's just irresponsible.
100%.
Like, how could you, Timbo's going to have $250,000 in debt, college nowadays, inflation, yada, like how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's all fair. I think it's all fair to go like, yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. But what I know to this point is all I can speak of. And what I know to this point, every hurdle we've gotten to, I've seen God show up in only ways I can explain it as God. And so what Timbo's going to have to face is, I don't know. And when we get there, Jill and I are committed to do everything we can to partner with him to the fullest extent we possibly can, to allow him not to experience the bondage of debt and the shackles of debt. How's that going to happen? I don't know. And that's an honest answer. But what I do know, over the last almost 2 decades, every time we've done this, every time that, hey, here's a big hurdle and I have no idea how we're going to pay for this. I have no idea what that is actually doing to the future of my children, right? Because that would be the question. God has shown up over and over and over. And God has a plan that's far better than mine. And God is able to meet my needs far better than I am able to meet my needs. And I'm just telling you, it's like one of those things to go, it's kind of like, I've shared before, it's like having kids. You can talk about it all day long and, you shouldn't have kids because of this, and you shouldn't do that because, and this is how you should raise your kids, and this is what you should do. And I'm like, do you have kids? And they're like, no. Okay, well, you're an expert. Like, you've thought through all the things. It's legitimate. It's fair.
Yeah.
But have kids.
Yeah.
And once you have kids,
Experience
which you're
it.
about to.
Yep. Let me just double check that I haven't already. Yep,
yeah,
I'm good.
You're good. Then you will run into all those tensions and you will see what God does. And that's all I can say about it because it's fair points. And that's why I'm saying maybe invite God into that. Maybe God is saying save $250,000 for your kids. Wonderful. That's not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want it to be relational.
Yeah.
And I want you to subject your fears to God and think about what's your devotion. What are you truly devoted to? Jesus makes it so clear, that he knows, he cares. He created you in his image. He's the God of tomorrow. Don't let the tomorrow's fears determine so much of what we do today. Like, trust me, kiddo, trust me, kiddo, trust me. I will provide. And that's what I've seen.
Yeah. Well, Jesus talks about you can't serve both God and money. It seems that, with how often Jesus brought it up, it seems to be one of the things that vies for our heart and our trust and our attention more than anything else. And so when we do choose to trust God, you could also argue it's one of the biggest ways in which God can really show up in our lives in kind of unexpected ways, that he shows up in our finances because we've chosen to trust him with the very thing that fights the most for our heart.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I would just say, and people who are radically generous, just talk with them.
Yeah.
Talk with them about all the practical questions. Well, what about kids? And what about, are you shackling them? And what about your future? And what about health things? And what about, just talk with them. The more people I talk with who've chosen to be radically generous, they tell a story that's hard to believe. and they tell a story of God's faithfulness.
Yeah.
And that's just experientially what I would lean into and just say, talk to people like that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one last question I want to hit.
Sure.
So, you've talked about generosity in terms of like large gifts and allocating resources at like opportune times, but also making it a habit month to month. But you've talked about it in the sense of giving to organizations, giving to movements, things like that. What about just kind of a day-to-day kind of posture of being open to being generous to people, work or neighbors or school, strangers, at restaurants, tips. I've heard people, one of John Acuff, he talks about it's Thanksgiving or Christmas, I can't remember, but they go to a random restaurant, kids get to pick it, and they leave a $200 tip. And it's become a, tradition in their family, and it's just them being like, hey, we're going to be generous as a family.
Yeah.
Somebody, waiter, waitress might need this, and it's going to be something fun that we do together.
And I know this is not a direct answer to that question, but just in what he did, this is what I'm saying. This is the tension at play. And I hope listeners and people who are watching lean into this tension. People would say that is incredibly irresponsible. You are enabling people. You are furthering their dysfunction, their hurt, their drug, whatever it is. You can throw all that on the table, and it's fair. It's fair. It's a real tension. But what he is teaching his children, what they're experiencing in terms of the joy of that, the happiness of that, and what God is doing on the back end that they'll never know this side of heaven. I'm just telling you, that is a whole different world that you open yourself up to when you choose to be generous. It is adventurous. And that's what I want people to experience. And I think that's what the book is saying. But to your question, in terms of like other ways to be generous, what does that look like? As I looked at this question, I just thought, I just want to kind of close with reading a paragraph. And I know I read like 2 paragraphs earlier, so I don't know how this comes across.
This one looks smaller.
Yeah, this is smaller. But it really does say generosity is far more than money. And generosity is far more than just, hey, I'm going to give, and take money out of my bank account. It's much broader than that.
Yeah.
And I love how they phrased it. And they said generosity is not a random idea or a haphazard behavior, but rather in its mature form, at least a basic personal moral orientation to life. Generosity also involves giving to others, not simply anything in abundance, but rather giving those things that are beneficial to others. So it's very strategic. It's very well thought. It's wise. There's wisdom in it. And then it concludes and it says, generosity always intends to enhance the true well-being of those to whom something is being given. For this reason, we think generosity is ultimately an expression of love. Even if in specific instances, it takes on appearances of responsibility, justice, duty, or citizenship exercised. What exactly generous people give can vary. Money, possessions, time, attention, aid, encouragement, emotional availability, and so much more. So generosity, certainly money's part of it, but it's so much broader than that, and consistent deposits of generosity are the thing that make the difference.
Yeah. That's good. That's a good way to finish. And on behalf of everybody listening and watching, just thanks for being vulnerable with, you and Jill's story, because I think it's inspiring for so many people who haven't quite dove into those waters of generosity to really invite God in that way. So thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome.
We're going to be in part 2 next week, Paradox of Generosity. I'm excited. We'll see everybody on Sunday, online or in person.
Yes, and I will be very vulnerable Sunday, and I'm going to share something that I've struggled with a long time, so you do not want to miss it, because it's not what you expect.
Oh, man. Here we go.
Here we go. All right. Thanks, Jeremy.